If you need any more convincing about how relevant, essential, and significant the arts are to the human existence, then the book Your Brain on Art by Susan Magsamen and Ivy Ross will do it. So, who are the authors, Susan Magsamen and Ivy Ross? Well, they're our guests for this week's episode of the Singing Teachers Talk podcast, and we'll be welcoming them very shortly. Susan is the founder and executive director of the International Arts Plus Mind Lab, where she looks at how the arts change the brain, the body, behaviour, and how this can inform things like health, well-being, and education. And Ivy is the chief design officer for the consumer devices at Google, and has held other executive positions at the likes of Calvin Klein and Mattel. Ivy is an artist, and her metalwork in jewellery is in the permanent collections of 12 international museums. We are in very good company. Just a little bit about their book before we get them on. Your Brain on Art is a book where art and science come together on the page. In a nutshell, it's packed with research and real-world stories that show us the arts aren't just a luxury or something to do on a rainy day. Instead, they are what help us make sense of life. They connect us as humans, and they actually physically change us. One of my favourite parts of the book is the journey through the senses. It's through these portals, after all, that we take in the world around us and therefore the art that we behold. And it's full of examples of how art has impacted people's well-being, like tuning forks for calming stressful situations, singing, helping mothers with postnatal depression, even mask making as a way to support people living with PTSD. Now, it's not all anecdotes. The book introduces readers to neuroaesthetics, or sometimes called neuroarts. This is a scientific study of how the arts and aesthetics affect the brain and the body. The book is positioned as part of a movement of social prescription to legitimize art as a form of healing. Now, who's this book really for? If you're curious about what's happening in the brain when we create or experience art, this is for you. If you're someone who's passionate about living a creative life or using art to support well-being or to enhance learning, you'll find so much here. And if you've ever been told or had a student that's been told to get a real job, this book gives you the science to answer back. There is nothing more real than the transformative power of art. And who isn't this book for? Well, it's for everyone, really. It's not a singing-specific book with a collection of vocal exercises that I know we all hunt for. It's broader than that, covering drawing, colouring, dancing, architecture, all sorts of art forms. That said, as teachers, we can still pull out some very practical ideas. For example, why not get our students to maybe doodle whilst we're going through some of that music theory stuff? Or maybe thinking about the ways we create the space that the singer comes into so that they feel good. Some common things being described in the book as a sense of coherency, organisation, fascination, interest, and a homey feel. Art has been with us since the beginning of time, before it even had a name. It's an undeniable part of our human makeup. Aren't we lucky as singing teachers that we get to sit in a room that is filled with art and music? If you've ever doubted whether what you do matters, or whether what you do in the session is actually doing anything to progress that person, this book will remind you that it does matter, and you are making change. Art, down to the very bones of it, is human. Susan Magsamen and Ivy Ross, welcome to the podcast. Your lovely book, Your Brain on Art, it describes and examples so many ways that art impacts us, from positive influences over memory and depression, PTSD, retention, learning, changes in biology. And overall, as you say in the book, the arts are essential to our very survival. I love that quote. Could you share with us, Susan, if we go to you first, a time when a particular art form has had a profound impact on you?
Thank you for having us. First of all, this is really wonderful to be here. You know, I often say that I'm a little bit like the fish in water. I grew up immersed in arts and aesthetic experiences. I come from a family of women. I'm one of 5 girls, and we made things constantly. We cooked, we gardened, we sing, we put on shows, we knitted, crocheted. My mom wrote poetry. My mom still writes poetry. And so I think maybe for me, the aha was that that was not true for everyone. And that in fact, that living a life, an artful life was something that I was so gifted to have been a part of. And then knowing how valuable that was and how rare it was to really live that life just has made it even more important for me. So I feel like every day is for me is like, how do I honor that?
You should tell the story about your sister, though.
Oh, okay. Okay. So I'm a twin, and my sister is an artist. Actually, she's a children's book author. But when we were little, we had a farming accident at our family's home where my sister almost lost her leg, and she was traumatized. And in those days, we didn't know that word or how trauma affected the body. People that would come home from war wouldn't talk about what happened, but they had shell shock was the term from the Second World War. But my sister really was shut down. And it was when my mother suggested that she start to draw that she was able to find her voice and we were able to reconnect. So that was profound for me. As a twin, you have telepathy, you read each other's thoughts. If my stomach hurts, she's getting her appendix out. And it totally severed that when she had this accident. And so I saw through my sister's metaphors and drawings and her piecing together how the arts really gave her language and gave her vision. It really brought us back together and brought her back to herself. And it's interesting, my sister became an art therapist and I became an arts and recreation therapist in my early work. And so what affects you when you're young and how that manifests as you grow is so extraordinary. And it's only in the rearview mirror do you kind of begin to see like, oh, that changed my life.
Wow, that's an incredible story. And what about you, Ivy?
Yeah, so I grew up in a household where my dad was a known designer, and so it was very creative, but a time it profoundly affected me. Unfortunately, my parents would fight a lot, and so I would close the door in my purple room and play the drums, more like an American Indian pull drum, to really get my heart in resonance in a different way. And so I would go into my own world to get out of the anxiety heartbeat and into a different rhythm. And so I think I began my journey on sound and music and all of that through, and I'm very thankful for it, using it to take me to another place emotionally.
Yeah, I've had the same with books and theatre my whole life. It will only have to be the first note that plays from the orchestra and I am gone. And I think, whoa, hold on, I don't have control over my breathing. I have no idea what's going on. And there's been times where I've read a book and sobbed into a towel because it felt so profound and like I knew them, and that in this particular book, that I had to grieve them as well. And I felt that grief for about a week. Now I have the book framed on my wall. It's A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. It's extremely hard hitting, very dark, a lot of very uncomfortable subjects and topics discussed in that. I will never hear the word or the name Jude again in the same way because of the main character and the experiences that he had. And yeah, he is framed on my wall, the whole 700-page book.
Well, catharsis is so interesting. We think of the arts as always making us feel good, and they do, right? But they also allow us to go to these emotional places that are dark, that are painful, and to be able to release them in a way that frees you from a past or something present. And I think what's interesting about books and theater and music as a beholder is that you are empathizing and you're trying on different roles and you're in resonance with something that may not be yours, but it can come in and out of you. And those processes of the catharsis are something that happen in these aesthetic and creative expression experiences both as maker and beholder. And there's nothing else that does that for human beings. And I think that's really important. Ivy, you talk a lot about how we forgot that. We forgot that this is how we're wired to have this kind of give and take.
When we're actually thinking about art, I had this debate with my husband just before I came on. Actually, he was getting himself a cup of tea, and I was talking about that I was going to meet you both and talk about art. And he was like, well, what do you class as art? How far does the term art go? What are we actually referring to when we say the word art?
Well, this is something that Susan and I obviously had to discuss. And we went back to tribal times when we thought there was no word art. It was the way they lived their life and still do, right? Dancing, singing, storytelling, cave paintings. That is the way to live. They didn't have to have a word called art. And I think as soon as we commercialized art, it became capital A. But after a lot of conversation and deep digging, we see it as those things that the mediums allow you to creatively express or to experience the creative expression of someone else. And we like to say even gardening is the slowest art form.
I am terrible at gardening as well, can I just say? Absolutely awful.
And you don't have to be good at it in order for it to have great value. That's the fun, right? Yeah, which is really sort of extraordinary. And you also don't have to do every art form, right? I think we all are so unique individuals, every single one of us. And somebody said recently, there'll never be another you, right? It's you. And if you can really think about that, you're going to find what resonates for you as your creative expression. And it's going to be different for all of us. And can we allow for that breadth of expression and see it in the other and know it for ourselves without judgment? And judgment is something that we've learned as children, that if you're not good at it, you shouldn't do it, that there are only certain things that are considered art. So we've really tried to broaden that definition for, I think, all the right reasons.
Yeah. And then, the judgment is what shut us down as kids. Most of us sang, we danced, we drew. And then someone said, oh, be quiet, or that's not the way you draw a house, or that you're never going to earn a living at that. And it just stops. And it's so interesting because Susan and I, now having grandchildren, I mean, we're obsessed with, okay, how do we keep this going in these kids? Because, we wrote the book because we realized people have put the arts aside as a nice to have, not critical for our health and well-being. And if we could rewrite the script, I mean, we all understand and have it in us. That's why we, as kids, play and sing and dance, and then we stop. And the beautiful thing is either being the maker or the receiver, being on stage or sitting in the audience, has incredible benefits. And we're physiologically wired to be engaged in the arts.
Is there any science on the differences between when you are actually the beholder of the art compared to when you're physically creating the art itself?
Yeah, there is. And that's such a good question. There's certainly overlap, right, in terms of neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin, and even regulation of things like cortisol for stress, or deactivating the amygdala for that sort of overactivation. But some of the things that we know about being a beholder, we talked about it a little bit, is that when you are a beholder, you are have this ability to perspective take. So to understand the other in their form. And you also have a lower risk to yourself of being able to try on those different feelings and maybe attach to them if they resonate with you, or to say, oh, I don't know that feeling. And then empathy is the other piece that I think is so interesting, is we can relate to each other through those expressions of the other. And then there's compassion. But the difference between compassion and empathy is that empathy is, I know that feeling. I know what you're feeling, and I'm deeply understanding it through your eyes. And maybe that's helping me. And maybe my empathizing, witnessing is helping you. And I think witnessing is a really important thing that we also don't do well is hold space for someone's creative expression. But compassion is something that we have not had the experience. I don't know what it feels like to have that loss. I might know some loss, but I don't know that loss, or I don't know that elation, right? And I'm compassionate about that, and I'm learning. I become a learner in being compassionate to that, and my world changes. My neural pathways grow, my neurotransmitters come online in a way that I didn't expect. If you're the maker, there are very tangible sensorial experiences that you can engage in. So, just something as simple as each of your fingers having, thousands of neurotransmitters that immediately go to the somatosensory cortex and release oxytocin and other chemicals. You have this ability to be able to bring the world in through those senses as you are as a maker. And those change you neurochemically immediately. There's also that self-referential knowledge that you gain by being the maker. And I think one of the most important things about being the maker, and obviously you can be a maker or a beholder for very different reasons. And I think that's important to remember too. It can be for health, it can be for learning, it can be for just general well-being, but no one can tell you what to make or how to make it. And I think there's something about personal agency in making that is really important. Like you might be in a room at a concert where you can't turn the concert off, right? But when you're a maker, you have the ability to decide if you're going to share it, decide if you're not going to share it, decide, what even colors you're going to choose. And that actually is really important for identity and character development too, and just bringing you back to who you are when sometimes you forget.
In the US now, there's medical schools that are using the arts to teach doctors about compassion and empathy, and really as a tool.
Hey you! If you're enjoying the Singing Teachers Talk podcast, then don't forget to hit the subscribe button. We are committed to bringing you engaging conversations and valuable insights from experts across the field of voice. By subscribing, it means we can continue to do that. You'll never miss an episode, and you'll be helping to spread the word to other singing teachers, vocal coaches, and overall voice nerds. So subscribe to this channel now and just watch your teaching grow. For episode 207 of this podcast, I spoke with founder of Music and Hospices, Joseph Cavalli-Price, and he told a really wonderful story of performing a song which resulted in a woman rising out of a coma. In your book, you say how art and science together are a really potent medicine. And because you mentioned there, Ivy, about in the US, art being something that's training doctors in empathy and compassion, what do we know about art and what it can do that medicine maybe can't, or how they contribute and share an outcome together?
I love that question. Makes me think about Oliver Sacks, who was a very famous doctor and ultimately dedicated the end of his life to music. And he wrote some beautiful books around music. And in the 70s, he contacted Connie Tomato, who is a music therapist, because she was doing this crazy thing. She was playing the guitar with people with Alzheimer's, and they were waking up. And he had just figured out how to help people wake up from a very debilitating disease. And he wanted to understand what was going on here. It was like another awakening. And what she found was that when she played autobiographical music, our songbooks, our playlists of our lives that get laid down when we're kids, right? And those really important ones, like in our teens, where, you can go back to the 80s for me and I can sing every single Carole King song and every James Taylor song, and they're just in my body and they come forward. She found that those parts of the brain that had not deteriorated with Alzheimer's and dementia or neurodegeneration would light up and people would literally wake up. And I think that's also true in hospice care, where parts of people's brains and bodies are beginning to shut down. But music in particular and sound has this amazing ability to be held in multiple parts of the brain, depending upon how we saved it, and especially this powerful autobiographical music. And so even at the end of our lives, we can find comfort and we can find peace. I said, and to your point about complementary and integrative health and what medicine can do in the healthcare system, woven together with these arts and aesthetic experiences, they are just perfect companions. And so we are not saying it's one or the other. We're saying yes and when you weave them together, I know people that prescribe music or drawing for people that won't take their medication because compliance is really important. And if you feel depressed and you don't have anything to live for, why are you going to take your medicine, right? So by feeling like you have something to live for, you take your medicine. And so they're great bedfellows. And I think we should think about them together.
When we were writing the book, one of the things Susan said is, make sure you and your husband exchange the soundtrack of your life. And I said, what do you mean? She said, give him a list of all the songs you love, and he should do the same so that you each have the other's list. So God forbid something happens, you make sure you play it. There's also a great video that was going around online of an elderly woman in a wheelchair in a coma who used to be a ballerina for Swan Lake, the ballet. And I think it's her son that plays it. And all of a sudden you watch her not only come alive, but she starts to go through all the movements that she as a ballerina did on stage. It's like alivens you, I think because our sensory systems are so critical that when we can light them up again, and as Susan says, the beautiful thing about sound and music is it doesn't just get stored in one part of the brain, but multiple. So if one's offline, it doesn't mean you're not going to come alive because it's there somewhere.
I'm a bit worried about what my playlist would be because I grew up in the 90s, so it's just going to be full on cheese. Somebody coming into, I don't know, wherever I might be hospitalized and playing a bit of, Spice Girls or Steps or Blue or something, some British boy band on the piano.
I love that.
Yeah, science has proven is also incredible for executive function, memory, flourishing. Yes, there's the disease side, but there's also the incredible nourishing side.
There's somebody that told me recently that when they have a headache, Led Zeppelin's the only thing that works for them. And I was like, do it, right? Like, you just don't know what is going to be that response that really, really works for you. I was talking to a woman yesterday whose husband had Alzheimer's, and I said, well, she said, you played music. And she said, I had like a pharmacy of music where if he was a certain kind of agitation, I played jazz. If it was a certain kind of melancholy, I played blues. And she was able to sort of match the kind of music that would work for him. I can't think of a drug that does that, right? That really literally is a boutique kind of response to that kind of moving mood state. And that's pretty extraordinary.
Well, when you think of it, it's all about resonance, right? Because we're vibrating atoms, and then these frequencies or sounds, whether it's your voice or music, has its own frequency. And so it's almost like when you find that match that makes you whole again, it's a beautiful thing. It's like writing your own prescription.
I want to bring that back to upstream to kids, because we don't teach kids how to self-regulate. That's really what this is how to self-regulate, how to come back into homeostasis and to be in resonance with themselves. And so if we were able to think about the way that just music, and forget all the other art forms for a moment, in schools for early childhood development, we would be able to think about how kids can learn to regulate their bodies, to think about resiliency, to think about stress and anxiety. And kids are telling us right now that they use creative expression for coping, and they use different kinds of art forms for different kinds of situations. And the world is extremely complicated and overwhelming for all the reasons that we know. So to help youth be able to use this, not because they're ill, but because they're just coping and thriving, hopefully, in a world that needs to be navigated in lots of different ways, and needs to also be able to hit pause to be able to come back in and think about who you are and what you need and how you come back into the world after some sense of renewal.
And that's why we thought about it as creative expression, because, there's big traumas and there's micro traumas that we're having every day now. And we're not taught to creatively express those traumas. We're taught to suppress them. And I think micro trauma over micro trauma, I mean, it just builds up, and that's when disease can happen. So this idea that lowering the cognitive load by just writing something, and even if you rip it up afterwards or singing it, it's amazing what that does. So the point is to get that out of your body and free yourself, because we don't realize the damage it does, or we are realizing the damage it does by holding it in.
And you reference sound and music and how they both offer something kind of separate. The sound to do with vibration and the music was something else. Can you tell us about why those two things sometimes are used separately, and when you wouldn't necessarily want sound to be a whole musical piece, but what music can actually offer when it is in a whole sort of orchestrated number, let's say?
Well, in MRIs, rehearsed music lights up a different part of the brain than improvisation, which lights up more of the brains. And music, and especially if it's songs, I think your cognitive mind engages in the words sometimes, but just sound is just pure vibration. So it's really two very different experiences. And they're doing, research now on sound. They think is potentially releasing nitric oxide, is it, Susan? That makes you relaxed. Very common now is sound baths. And I was doing those 40 years ago. But this idea that it can put you, if you just get lost in the sound and get swept away, it's releasing nitric oxide, which puts you in a relaxed state. Whereas music can get you very engaged and excited and emotionally connected.
And I guess that's why meditation is that one, or tends to be a one hummed note.
Well, in that case, in meditation, those sounds activate the vagus nerve too, right? So that vibration, you're actually creating that connection, that mind, body, spirit connection, in that way. The other thing about music, separate from sound, is that often music is cultural. And so there's a context to the music that can be spiritual, it can be religious, it can be socioeconomic, it can be gendered based. And that's really an important element to an aesthetic mindset and to an aesthetic experience that you're having. It makes me think about Ivy chromosonics, where this is a light and sound experience where you hear color and you see sound. And the reason that they did not make it music was they didn't want to have a cultural context. They wanted you to really be enveloped in this vibration where sound and color vibrate at the same frequencies. And so you have this sort of radical present experience where you're literally, color is so powerful. And this is an open eye experience, and sound together, it's sort of amplifying what sound frequencies do from a neurophysiological perspective. And, when Ivy has done beautiful work with tuning forks, where she can literally help someone get back to a regulation based on what is out of frequency, or what frequency is needed. And I think that's also something that we don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about, is, what sounds are we in? What is constantly being put into our bodies from whether it's too much sound or the not right kinds of sound. So I think there's a lot of work that's being done there.
And with the chromosonic experience, where they wrote this software, because both sound and color is just frequency, and found that connection, your brain, your cognitive mind, because it can't make sense of it, you get out of your cognitive mind and it gets you into your body, into that present state. And so it's a way, and many people who have had the chromosonic experience, it's like 20 minutes, no longer see a psychologist or psychiatrist. They said, I'd rather come here once a week and have this step into this immersive environment with color and sound that takes me, clears the monkey mind and gets me into that present moment. And I feel renewed. And so, we do think the future is, like we said, not a substitute for medicine, but there'll be more and more of these, of understanding. There's a woman at MIT that's using sound and color to ignite the plaque clearing off your brain and helping in Alzheimer's. So there's incredible things being looked at now. And it's really the combination of frequencies, because we are vibrating atoms. And it's certainly a lot more fun, right, to step into a color box than to step into a psychiatrist's office.
Funnily enough, I've just moved house and we've got just a little spare room that was going to be like a library. And it's my space. My husband doesn't read, or he chooses not to read. And I was like, what color should this be? And all that came to mind was it needs to be calm. It needs to be a place to go where you can just relax and your troubles aren't there. You just close the door and you can go and see these characters in all these different worlds that are around you. And it's a dark, dark green color.
Mm.
And the whole time I was like, I need to paint the ceiling, because if the ceiling's white, I just don't think it's going to create the ambience I need. And it was really funny because my dad was like, absolutely not. That's a horrific color. And my husband was like, it's such a small room. Don't do it. And then one day I got a little bit of paint and I went bloop on the ceiling. And I thought, well, I've got to do it now because there's a splodge of green paint. And I did it. And it's wonderful, I have to say.
I love that you did that, because, some friends of mine are saying, if I ever write a memoir, I should call it Growing Up in the Purple Box. So my dad, who was a designer, and in the 50s when I was born, maybe you did one wall in a color as an accent color. He painted exactly what you did, every wall and the ceiling, and had a carpet dyed to that exact shade of, it was like a lavender purple. And so I grew up in a purple box. I was in that particular vibratory field a lot of my time. It was my happy place. It was where I would go, shut the door and play music, or I made collages as a kid, but I would be in my own world. And it was super important when people say, you're so creative. I really believe it was because of that. It was because of the purple box that he gave me. So I love that you did that. And that was, your intuition told you to do that. And you just didn't listen to anyone else because it's what you need.
Yeah. And my husband then was like, actually, no, that was a good idea.
But it takes bravery, right? And courage sometimes to create the spaces. I was going to go to exactly where you went with in terms of spaces. Right now, Ivy and I are doing more and more work and thinking about intentional spaces and how do we create the spaces that feed us. And so you're doing that. And in Ivy's bedroom, that was created, that intentional space where you could really feel yourself. And in Ivy's case, it's almost like a cocoon that allowed her to be safe. And if you're not safe, you can't express yourself either. And I often say that safety is not just the absence of threat, but it's the invitation to share yourself and experiment and try things on. And we have something called the aesthetic mindset, which is 4 things. One of them is just curiosity, right? Being curious about the world. And then the second is really playful exploration. So goofing off, playing around without any sort of expectation or finished product, which, mostly we don't live like that. And then the third is sensory experience, right? Intentionally feeling the temperature, smelling, touching, tasting. And then the last is being both a maker and a beholder. So creating that aesthetic mindset for each of us is so important. And it doesn't mean you have to do more. It's that you're intentional about the kinds of ways that you want to live. And it changes everything, almost like a kaleidoscope when you just turn it a little bit.
I'd be really interested to know your opinions on this. I mean, as singing teachers, we're often creating those environments for people to come into, whether that's a room that we've created ourselves or whether it's a space in an institution or a rented space that we go into. But if we meet somebody, even young children sometimes who come in and are afraid to be playful because of a self-conscious aspect of it, or they have been told maybe don't be silly in their life, and so they feel like if they are to be playful, it would be to go against that instruction of being silly. Sometimes we're meowing quite a bit. You wouldn't think that would be something you do in singing, but we do. How can this research help us as teachers to help the singer, therefore, be a bit more curious and allow themselves that play, and to help them develop further on in this particular artistic skill?
Well, I think you have to show it, not tell it. I think modeling that behavior and you being a safe space where you can meow and you can giggle and you can shake it out, and that your space becomes that space for a child. I mean, we all want that. I do a lot of work with academics and with people in leadership positions, and I never say, let me tell you why the arts are so important to you. I get them to stand up and sing in the middle of an auditorium. Or I had a guy once who was like, I don't dance. And I'm like, I was on the phone and I said, go to your closet, get in your closet. And I just want you to move your body. And he came out and he was like, oh my God, I can't believe how good this feels. So when you do it, immediately, you know, it's intuitively the right thing to do. And I think the reason the book has been so successful is because the book gave people permission to do what they had been told not to do. And so they went against the status quo, and because we are saying it's good for you. Oh, and by the way, science says so. And so I think the science backs up. But once you have the feeling, you never go back. You can't, because you know it's the right thing, because it is our nature. And that's what's so beautiful about it. So create a safe space and just be silly in it, and you'll be amazed at how people will follow that. And it may take a little time, but
correct me if I'm wrong, Susan, but wasn't it a talk you gave to the science community and you had them start out by playing kazoos?
5,000 scientists. Yeah. And they were really uncomfortable. But then once they did it, they started to laugh. And your laughter is joy. And when you start to be able to feel those chemicals change, they're drugs, right? We are filled with chemicals that can make us feel good. And I think kids that are shut down for any reason, or adults that are shut down, if you give them that permission in that space and they trust you, trust is so important. It's amazing. But yeah, I see it over and over and over again. And you just got to do it. And also, obviously, nature is also incredibly important. So even getting your students to sing outside is also, I think, something where, birds do it, bees do it, even ordinary fleas do it.
I mean, nature is the most neuroaesthetic space there is because it has sound, color, shape, temperature. So it immediately activates all of our sensory systems. And so, we've come from nature. It's our nature. So that's why, if you need a dose to just change the way you see things, it's go out and take a walk in the forest. When the book first came out, we got so many just personal notes saying, thank you for giving me permission to make art again. And so it really has been about, because I think we know it intuitively, but we get shut down for all the reasons we talked about. And when you ignite it again, you can feel that it feels like what we're supposed to be doing. I was once on the board, it was the National Institute for Play, and we studied play. And the truth is that people think the opposite of work is play. The opposite of play is depression. And one of the definitions of play is doing something different than you do every day without a preconceived outcome. So I think we're so outcome driven, especially now, and especially since the Industrial Revolution. It's been about efficiency, productivity. And so we felt that's what we're supposed to be doing, is doing it quicker, more. And that's not necessarily the case. In fact, the brain works better when you are having the rigor of something, but then you take some time for play and it integrates, or not working. And so we just have it wrong. And this idea of making sure that we do things that do not have a preconceived outcome is super important. So I think what you're modeling for people or for kids to just burst out in song, be silly, sing, I mean, it's just so important for the brain and the health and well-being.
In your chapter on cultivating well-being, you described a study that was carried out by Daisy Fancourt, am I pronouncing her name correctly? Where one of the results was, and I'm just going to quote from your book if that's okay, people who engaged in the arts were found to have lower mental distress, better mental functioning, and improved quality of life. There's a guy here, Dr. George Musgrave, who recently did a short course for the Voice Study Centre. And a clip that he shared on their social media account was him putting forth the question of how do we encourage participation in music and therefore arts whilst preparing aspiring singers for potentially the harmful reality of that work. So whether that's performing arts, music, performance anxiety, or rejection, when basically that art becomes your career.
It's so interesting. I do think that training in the arts provides you with more resiliency for those kinds of rejections and issues. But there's a lot more work being done now with performers who are experiencing psychological distress, like performance anxiety, or even physiological issues that you don't have. Think of it like an athlete. If you're a performer and you're a singer or you're a musician or a dancer, the kinds of injuries, physical and mental injuries, are different than the general public because of your occupation. But I do think that we do see that these basic training skills are helpful. The other side of that, and Ivy started to allude to it with this idea of improvisation versus the part of the brain that's also prefrontal that judges you. And so when you're a performer, and you're learning to sing something or you're learning a dance, you're constantly critiquing yourself until you reach mastery. And then at a mastery level, you are able to turn off that critiquing brain and you go into what's more of an autonomic mode. And hopefully you're able to go into that flow state where, because you know it so well, you're able to not have to have that sort of working memory to remember what you need to remember. It's coming out. And you see that with people as they age. Tony Bennett is a really good example. He was a singer. He died recently, last couple of years, but he could still sing every song because he knew them so well, right? He would go into a flow state, even though parts of his other brain wasn't working. The part of the brain that was holding that could hold that. And so I think when you are training, you have this ability to be able to move into a part of the brain that just is in recall. And that has a protective measure. But you also do need to be able to think about the kinetic changes, the cardiovascular changes, the muscular changes, the pulmonary changes that happen that can move you into disorders of movement disorders and other kinds of things because you're in that profession.
Yeah, it's just the journey, it's like you have to move through it because I think it was David Byrne, right? And he's come public with his story. I mean, he had anxiety and actually being on the stage and working through that. I mean, look at him now. So I think like anything, when you're training, there will be some repercussions to get there. It's because it's a journey, but the benefit,
being drawn to it, right? Being drawn to the arts may be the part. Yeah.
Well, because intuitively, I think he knew that he had to work through that anxiety, and the arts or theater was a way to get through it, as hard as it was.
And I think also when we go into a career that is an artistic career, it's usually come out of what we have enjoyed, what made us feel good in the past. So being able to revisit why are you doing this in the first place? The rejection is hard, but why don't we just go back and do this with no judgment on it at all? Or why don't you write a poem about it or draw a picture about it? So maybe you're using other bits of art to help you find your way back into a bit more confidence with what you're actually pursuing.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Go back to the initial conditions under which you started, which was that intuitive spark, and to keep that flame.
You hope that the arts become viable careers too, right? Like right now, the arts are being taken out of so many places, or they're being, devalued. And I think if you're an artist and you want to make a living at being an artist, it's really hard. And so it's inherently hard. And, thinking about creative economies where governments are paying people to be singing on the streets, right? We're paying artists to create art. We're thinking about mural artists. We're thinking about all these different forms of art where it becomes part of the culture. And so, the choice to be an artist, I think, is a very brave choice. And it's hard. It's really hard. It doesn't matter what discipline it is. And so, I think we have to give artists a lot of credit for holding that space.
Ivy and Susan, it's been so wonderful to chat with you both, and I've really enjoyed the book. So thank you so much for giving up your time today and chatting with me about art. And I wish you all the best with your future work.
Thank you. And thank you for
pleasure.
doing the work that you do. It's really important. Really important.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.